After lunch, the young man went downtown. He met with Ms. Gomez, a competent-looking woman in her early 40s. Getting down to business, the young man asked, "Could you please tell me what is the most efficient and effective of all your operations in the country? I want to compare it with the so-called one-minute managers." A moment later he laughed as he heard Ms. Gomez say, "Well, you won't have to look very far, because it is the one-minute managers. He's quite a guy, isn't he? His operation is the most efficient and effective of all our plants." "That's unbelievable," said the young man. "Does he have the best equipment?" "No," said Ms. Gomez. "In fact, he's got some of the oldest." "Well, there's got to be something wrong out there," said the young man, still puzzled by the old man's management style. "Tell me, does he lose a lot of his people? Does he have a lot of turnover?" "Come to think of it," Ms. Gomez said, "he does have a lot of turnover." "Aha," the young man said, thinking he was onto something. "What happens to those folks when they leave the one-minute manager?" the young man wanted to know. "We give them their own operation," Ms. Gomez quickly responded. "After 2 years with him, they say, 'Who needs a manager? He's our best trainer of people. Whenever we have an opening and need a good manager, we call him. He always has somebody who is ready.'" Amazed, the young man thanked Ms. Gomez for her time, but this time he got a different response. "I was glad I could fit you in today," she said. "The rest of my week is really jammed. I wish I knew what the one-minute manager's secrets were. I've been meaning to go over there and see him, but I just haven't had time." Smiling, the young man said, "I'll give you those secrets as a gift when I find them out myself, just like he's giving them to me." "That would be a precious present," Ms. Gomez said with a smile. She looked around her cluttered office and said, "I could use whatever help I can get." The young man left Ms. Gomez's office and walked out into the street, shaking his head. The one-minute manager was absolutely fascinating to him. That night, the young man had a very restless sleep. He found himself excited about the next day, about learning the third secret to becoming a one-minute manager. The next morning, he arrived at Ms. Brown's office at the stroke of 9. A very smartly dressed woman in her late 50s greeted him. He got the usual, "He's quite a guy, isn't he?" routine. But by now the young man was getting to the point where he could sincerely say, "Yes, he is." "Did he tell you about being a one-minute manager?" asked Ms. Brown. "That's all I've been hearing about," the young man said, laughing. "It's not true, is it?" he asked, still wondering if he'd get a different answer. "You better believe it is. I hardly ever see him." "You mean you don't have much contact with him?" pursued the young man. "Outside your regular weekly meeting?" "Essentially very little, except of course when I do something wrong," said Ms. Brown. Shocked, the young man said, "You mean the only time you see the one-minute manager is when you do something wrong?" "Yes. Well, not quite," said Ms. Brown, "but almost." "But I thought a key motto around here was catching people doing things right." "It is," insisted Brown, "but you have to know some things about me." "What?" asked the young man. "I've been working here for quite a few years. I know this operation inside and out. As a result, the one-minute manager doesn't have to spend much time with me, if any, on goal setting. In fact, I usually write out my goals and send them over to him." "Is each goal on a separate sheet of paper?" asked the young man. "You bet. No longer than 250 words, and each one takes me or the one-minute manager only a minute to read. Another thing about me that's important is that I just love my work. As a result, I do most of my own one-minute praisings. In fact, I believe if you're not for yourself, who is? A friend of mine told me a motto I'll always remember. If you don't blow your own horn, someone else will use it as a spittoon." The young man smiled. He liked her sense of humor. "Does your manager ever praise you?" he asked. "Sometimes he does, but he doesn't have to do it very often because I beat him to the punch," answered Ms. Brown. "When I do something especially good, I might even ask the one-minute manager for a praising." "How would you ever have the nerve to do that?" asked the young man. "It's easy. Just like making a bet where I either win or I break even. If he gives me the praising, I win. But if he doesn't, the young man broke in, then I break even, responded Ms. Brown. I didn't have it before I asked. The young man smiled as he took note of Ms. Brown's philosophy, and then continued. You said he spends time with you when you do something wrong. What do you mean? Asked the young man. If I make a significant mistake, that's when I invariably get a 1-minute reprimand, Ms. Brown said. A what? The startled young man asked. A 1-minute reprimand, Ms. Brown repeated. That's the third secret to becoming a 1-minute manager. How does it work? Wondered the young man out loud. It's simple, said Ms. Brown. I figured you'd say that, said the young man. Ms. Brown joined his laugh and explained, If you have been doing a job for some time and you know how to do it well, and you make a mistake, the 1-minute manager is quick to respond. What does he do? Asked the young man. As soon as he has learned about the mistake, he comes to see me. First, he confirms the facts. Then he might put his hand on my shoulder, or maybe just come around to my side of the desk. Doesn't that bother you? Asked the young man. Sure it does, because you know what's coming, especially since he doesn't have a smile on his face. He looks me straight in the eye, she continued, and tells me precisely what I did wrong. Then he shares with me how he feels about it. He's angry, annoyed, frustrated, or whatever he's feeling. How long does that take? Asked the young man. Only about 30 seconds, but sometimes it seems forever to me, confided Ms. Brown. The visitor couldn't help but remember the feelings he had when the 1-minute manager told him, in no uncertain terms, how annoyed he was with his indecision. And then what happens? The young man asked as he moved to the edge of his chair. He lets what he said sink in with a few seconds of silence. Boy, does it sink in! Then what? The young man asked. He looks me squarely in the eye and lets me know how competent he thinks I usually am. He makes sure I understand that the only reason he is angry with me is that he has so much respect for me. He says he knows this is so unlike me. He says how much he looks forward to seeing me some other time, as long as I understand that he does not welcome that same mistake again. The young man broke in. It must make you think twice. It certainly does. Ms. Brown nodded vigorously. The young man knew what Ms. Brown was talking about. He was taking notes now as fast as he could. He sensed that it wasn't going to take this woman long to cover several important points. First of all, Ms. Brown said, he usually gives me the reprimand as soon as I've done something wrong. Second, since he specifies exactly what I did wrong, I know he is on top of things and that I'm not going to get away with sloppiness. Third, since he doesn't attack me as a person, only my behavior, it's easier for me not to become defensive. I don't try to rationalize away my mistake by fixing blame on him or somebody else. I know he's being fair. And fourth, he's consistent. Does that mean he'll reprimand you for doing something wrong, even if things are going well for him elsewhere? Yes, she answered. Does the whole process really take only a minute? The young man asked. Usually, she said. And when it's over, it's over. A 1-minute reprimand doesn't last long, but I can guarantee you, you don't forget it, and you usually don't make the same mistake twice. I think I know what you're talking about, the young man said. I'm afraid I asked him. I hope, she interrupted, you didn't ask him to repeat himself. The young man was embarrassed. I did, he confessed. Then you know what it's like to be on the receiving end of a 1-minute reprimand, she said. Although I expect as a visitor, you got a rather mild one. I don't know if you'd call it mild, he said, but I don't think I'll ask him to repeat himself very often. That was a mistake. I wonder, the visitor said out loud, if the 1-minute manager ever makes a mistake. He seems almost too perfect. Ms. Brown began to laugh. Hardly, she said, but he does have a good sense of humor. So when he does make a mistake, like forgetting to do the last half of the 1-minute reprimand, we point it out to him and kid him about it. After we've had time to recover from the reprimand, that is. We might, for example, phone him later and tell him we know we were wrong. Then we might laugh and ask for the praising half of the reprimand because we're not feeling too good. And what does he do then? The young man asked. He usually laughs and says he's sorry he forgot to remind me that I'm an okay person. You can laugh about praisings and reprimands? The young man asked. Sure, Ms. Brown said. You see, the one-minute manager has taught us the value of being able to laugh at ourselves when we make a mistake. It helps us get on with our work. That's terrific, the young man enthused. How did you learn to do that? Simply, Ms. Brown answered, by watching the boss do it himself. You mean your boss can laugh at himself when he makes a mistake? The astonished young man asked. Well, not always, Ms. Brown admitted. He's like most of us. Sometimes it's tough, but often he can, and when he does laugh at himself, it has a positive effect on everyone around him. He must be pretty secure, the young man suggested. He is, Ms. Brown answered. The young man was impressed. He was beginning to see how valuable such a manager was to an organization. Why do you think the one-minute manager's reprimands are so effective? He asked. I'll let you ask the one-minute manager, she said, as she rose from behind the desk and walked the young man to the door. When he thanked her for her time, Ms. Brown smiled and said, You know what the response to that is going to be. They both laughed. He was beginning to feel like an insider rather than a visitor, and that felt good. As soon as he was in the hall, he realized how little time he'd spent with her and how much information she had given him. He reflected on what she had said. It sounded so simple. He reviewed in his own mind what you should do when you catch an experienced person doing something wrong. The one-minute reprimand works well when you, first, tell people beforehand that you're going to let them know how they are doing and in no uncertain terms. The first half of the reprimand. Second, reprimand people immediately. Third, tell people what they did wrong, be specific. Fourth, tell people how you feel about what they did wrong and in no uncertain terms. Fifth, stop for a few seconds of uncomfortable silence to let them feel how you feel. The second half of the reprimand. Sixth, shake hands or touch them in a way that lets them know you are honestly on their side. Seventh, remind them how much you value them. Eighth, reaffirm that you think well of them but not of their performance in this situation. And ninth, realize that when the reprimand is over, it's over. The young man may not have believed in the effectiveness of the one-minute reprimand if he hadn't personally experienced its effect. There was no doubt that he felt uncomfortable, and he did not want to experience it again. However, he knew that everyone made mistakes now and then, and that he might very well receive another reprimand someday. But he knew if it came from the one-minute manager that it would be fair, that it would be a comment on his behavior and not on his worth as a person. As he headed toward the one-minute manager's office, he kept thinking about the simplicity of one-minute management. All three of the secrets made sense: one-minute goals, one-minute praisings, and one-minute reprimands. But why do they work? He wondered. Why is the one-minute manager the most productive manager in the company?